They say betrayal never comes from your enemies, but no one ever tells you how it feels when the knife is signed in your own mother's handwriting. I still remember the texture of the paper. Cream-colored, smooth, thick, almost ceremonial, like it was meant for something sacred. And, in a way, it was. It was meant to secure someone's future, just not mine. It was supposed to be a normal weekend. I'd made the 2-hour drive down from Denver to Boulder like I always did, bringing coffee, groceries, and the same sense of duty I'd carried for years. My mother, Judith, greeted me at the porch with her usual half-smile, waving the manila folder I was all too familiar with. "Just a few papers for you to look through, sweetheart. I think some might be for the accountant." I didn't hesitate. I never did. Helping her with taxes, online bills, logging into accounts she always forgot the passwords for, it was part of our routine, part of my role. That house, with its ivy-covered windows and creaky wooden porch, wasn't just my parents' home. It was the place I helped rescue, the place I'd poured over $60,000 into, my emergency fund, my travel savings, even a small inheritance from a great aunt, just to keep them from losing it to the bank. But I never saw it as a burden. I saw it as love. Until that day. I sat at the old oak table, its surface still faintly scratched from when I refinished it 3 summers ago. As I flipped through the disorganized pile of papers, utility bills, medical claims, a few handwritten grocery lists, my hand paused on the thick envelope. It didn't belong, I knew instantly. And yet I opened it anyway, as if some part of me already knew that inside was the truth I'd been too loyal to consider. "Estate plan and will," the title read in stark, cold font. My heart didn't skip. It stalled. I shouldn't have looked, but I did. I had to. And within moments, everything I thought I knew about my place in this family evaporated. The house was going to Cassie, the car, the jewelry, the joint savings, the land in Estes Park we used to camp on. Every item was clearly designated, and every one of them had her name next to it. Mine was absent. Not a word, not a clause, not even a mention, except for one line at the top of the final page. "We love both our daughters." That was it. That was all I was worth after decades of carrying everyone else's weight on my back. I stared at the paper so long that the letters started to blur. My hands trembled. I tried to laugh, but the sound caught in my throat like broken glass. The irony was too cruel to be funny. My mother walked back into the house, humming softly, completely unaware of the seismic shift that had just occurred in my chest. "Elena, did you find the insurance statement?" she asked cheerfully. I stood slowly. The envelope in my hand felt like it was burning. "Is this real?" My voice was barely above a whisper. She looked up confused, then saw what I was holding. Her face went still. "Oh, honey, that's just the draft." "The draft?" I cut her off. "Is it a draft that leaves everything to Cassie and nothing to the daughter who paid your mortgage?" Her lips parted, but no sound came. And then quietly, "You've always been stable." Cassie. She's still trying to find her feet. I felt the kind of pain that doesn't shout. It stings in silence, like the echo of being erased. "Trying to find her feet?" I said. "She's 32 and still forgets to pay her own phone bill. Meanwhile, I've worked myself sick to keep this place afloat." And still, they looked at me with that gentle condescension, like I was being irrational for wanting fairness. Raymond walked in then, holding a steaming mug like this was any other afternoon. "Let's not make a scene, Elena. You're doing fine. Cassie's just more fragile." I didn't respond right away. I couldn't. Because everything inside me was trying to reconcile a truth I wasn't ready to accept. I had been useful, but never valued. "I'm not the strong one," I said finally. "I'm just the one you thought would never leave." No one said anything. I placed the will on the table like setting down a stone I'd carried too long. My feet moved toward the door before my mind had even decided to go. They didn't follow. They didn't call my name. And that, more than the will, was the answer I needed. I drove back to Denver with the windows rolled down, even though it was freezing. I needed to feel the cold. I needed something real to remind me that I wasn't dreaming. For the next 2 days, I didn't speak to anyone. I didn't cry. I just kept thinking one thing over and over. If this is what love looks like, maybe I've been loving wrong my whole life. If this story made your heart pause even for a second, please consider subscribing to the channel. Your support helps us keep sharing stories that uncover the hidden truths in everyday families, the ones that leave scars, and the ones that eventually bring healing. Every like and follow gives us the fuel to keep telling stories that matter. Now, before we continue, I want to ask you something simple but revealing. If you were in Elena's position, what would you have done in that moment? A. Confront them right away and demand an explanation. B. Leave quietly, like she did, and process the pain alone. Comment your answer below, just type A or B, and let us know how you would have handled it. Because as we return to Elena's story, what comes next is not just about money. It's about a lifetime of unspoken expectations, the cost of being the responsible one, and what happens when you finally decide to say no. There's a kind of silence that follows betrayal, not the dramatic kind filled with shouting or slammed doors. It's quieter than that. It creeps in around the edges of your thoughts, settles under your skin, and keeps whispering, "It was never going to be different." After leaving Boulder that day, I returned to Denver and didn't speak for hours. I couldn't. Every word felt like a betrayal to myself. How could I articulate the depth of a wound I hadn't even begun to process? I walked into my apartment, dropped my keys into the ceramic dish by the door, and stood in the hallway for what felt like years. The city outside hummed with life, but inside me, something had gone still, hollow. Over the next few days, the memories came in waves. Not the kind that warm you, but the ones that remind you of every storm you endured thinking you were doing the right thing. There was the winter I'd worked 12-hour shifts during the holidays to cover my parents' late mortgage payment. I remember the call Judith made that December, her voice shaking as she said, "Elena, we just need a little help, just for this month." And I had sent the money without hesitation. I didn't even buy a Christmas tree that year. There was the time I canceled a trip to the Oregon coast with friends because the water heater burst in their basement, and I was the only one who could afford to fix it quickly. No one else in the family even considered it their problem. And then there were the less visible sacrifices, skipping therapy because my budget was stretched too thin, putting off dental work, passing up a promotion at work because it required travel, and I didn't want to be too far in case something happened at the house. I had made a religion out of being dependable, and they had made me into a utility. Cassie, on the other hand, was a beautiful contradiction to everything I'd been taught to be. Free-spirited, emotional, always chasing the next new thing, whether it was a boyfriend, a band gig, or a brief obsession with becoming a yoga instructor. My parents praised her creativity and sensitivity, as if that somehow excused the chaos she left in her wake. I wasn't bitter that she was different. I was bitter that her recklessness was coddled while my reliability was punished. I once found her crying on my couch because she'd maxed out her credit card on a weekend trip to Palm Springs and didn't know how she'd pay rent. I paid it for her. I even brought her dinner. She told me, "You're the only one who really gets me." And in some twisted, broken part of me, I held on to that like it meant something more than convenience. But now, as I stood in my own kitchen pouring tea into a chipped mug, the kind you keep out of habit rather than affection, I saw it clearly for the first time. I had never been seen as a person with needs of my own. I was the fallback, the safety net, the adult in the room. I was responsible and therefore expendable. The first call from Judith came 5 days after I left. She didn't mention the will. Instead, she asked if I could help with the internet bill. "It didn't go through," she said lightly, like she was asking me to pass the salt. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I simply said, "No." There was a long pause. Then came the guilt. "Elena, don't be like this. We've always appreciated what you do. We're family." I didn't reply. She texted a few minutes later. "Please don't let this come between us. Cassie needs support right now. She's overwhelmed." That was the moment something inside me snapped, not with rage, but with a quiet clarity I had never known before. I realized I had been solving problems that weren't mine. covering debts I didn't create, sacrificing pieces of my future for a family who only saw my usefulness, never my humanity. That night, I opened my laptop and began the slow, painful process of disentangling myself. I logged into the utility accounts and removed my card from the autopay options. I called the bank and requested to have my name taken off the joint mortgage account. It would take a few weeks, they said, but it was possible. With every task, a weight lifted, but so did a layer of my past. I wasn't just changing information, I was rewriting the rules. I started journaling again, filling page after page with unspoken thoughts. Words like, I'm not their savior, and being needed is not the same as being loved. I wrote until my hand cramped, and then I kept writing. I also returned to something I hadn't touched in years, trail running. Just me, the dirt path, and the foothills near the Flatirons. I ran until my lungs burned, until my legs ached, until I could no longer feel the ache in my heart, and then I'd stop. Sit on a boulder and take it all in. I started bringing a small notebook with me, sketching the trees or jotting down fragments of thoughts. I was rediscovering the shape of my own life, the one I had put on pause for the sake of everyone else, and for the first time, I wasn't waiting for anyone to notice. Cassie, of course, hadn't called, but she didn't need to. I could feel her disappointment reverberating through the silences. The unspoken expectation had always been that I'd clean up the mess. I always had, until now. A week later, Raymond left a voicemail. There's a leak in the roof again. Any chance you can send someone over? It was said with the casual tone of someone ordering takeout. I deleted it. They didn't ask how I was doing. They didn't ask if I was okay. They didn't ask why I left without another word. Because to ask would mean acknowledging something was wrong, and that was not something our family did. One evening, as I sat on my balcony watching the sunset paint Denver in shades of copper and rose, I thought about all the ways I had contorted myself into being who they needed. The good daughter, the fixer, the reliable one. But no one had ever asked who I wanted to be. I picked up my phone and typed out a single message to myself. You're allowed to live without saving anyone. And I meant it. The next morning I baked scones, not for anyone else, just for me. I played music, danced around my apartment in socks, and let the scent of lemon and sugar wrap around me like a soft truth. This is what freedom smells like. Later that week, I signed up for a community art class I'd been eyeing for months. Photography and visual storytelling. Something I used to dream about pursuing before bills and obligations drowned those dreams in silence. I told no one. It wasn't a performance, it was mine. For the first time in my adult life, I wasn't busy patching up holes in other people's lives. I was building something for myself. And as I laid in bed that night, under a sky that didn't need my permission to be beautiful, I realized something. They had chosen Cassie. Now, I was choosing me. It didn't take long for the silence to curdle into noise. At first, I believed that maybe, just maybe, my parents had taken the hint. That they understood I needed distance, that I was finally drawing a line in the sand they'd so carelessly trampled over for years. But distance doesn't register in a family built on dependency. In families like mine, silence isn't respected. It's punished. The first message came 2 days after I'd pulled my name from the mortgage account. Elena, my father texted, the power bill's overdue. You usually take care of that. There was no question mark, no preamble, just a flat transactional request, as if I were a customer service rep who'd forgotten her shift. I didn't answer. A day later, Judith called. I let it ring, then watched as a voicemail appeared on my screen. Her voice was gentle at first, tinged with sugar and confusion. Sweetheart, what's going on? I tried logging into the water bill, but I think the password changed. Can you reset it for me? She didn't even acknowledge the will or my absence. It was as though none of it had happened. As if I was just late to a meeting I'd agreed to attend years ago. When I still didn't reply, the tone shifted. She called again that evening, this time leaving a longer message. I don't understand why you're being like this. We've always appreciated you. Cassie's not doing well right now, and your father's health isn't what it used to be. You've always been so strong. Please, don't make us beg. That word, beg, landed wrong in my stomach. Because what she called begging was really another form of control. It was the language of guilt dressed up as vulnerability. 2 days later, Cassie sent a voice memo. I stared at it for a long time before playing it, half expecting her to shout. But her tone was quiet, almost rehearsed. You know, you always told me that family means showing up, that we don't turn our backs on each other. So what changed, Elena? Why now? I could have answered a dozen different ways, but I didn't. Not then. Instead, I sat with the weight of her words, let them hover in the room like stale perfume, because the truth was, I hadn't turned my back on anyone. I had just finally turned toward myself. I started noticing how people react when you say no to a role they've silently assigned you. They don't just get upset, they get offended. Like you've robbed them of something that rightfully belonged to them. And that's exactly what began unfolding. My refusal to pay the bills, to log in and fix things, to help out just this once, wasn't seen as an act of boundary setting. It was viewed as betrayal. Cassie texted again a few days later, this time less polite. It's not that hard, you know. You've always done this. Why make things harder now just to prove a point? I stared at the blinking cursor in the reply box, debating whether or not to respond. And then, in a moment of calm but crystal clarity, I typed, I'm not trying to prove a point. I'm protecting my peace. You should try it. I never got a reply. The next week, I joined a local support group. It was something a friend from my photography class had recommended, a weekly circle for adult children of dysfunctional families. I was hesitant at first. The idea of sitting in a room with strangers and unraveling years of pain felt daunting. But on the first evening, as we each introduced ourselves and began to speak, something shifted. There was a woman who'd been the family peacemaker since she was 12, a man who paid off his parents' debts 3 times before they stopped answering his calls, a quiet girl in her 20s who said, I thought I was generous. Turns out I was just scared to be called selfish. Every single one of them carried the same invisible backpack I had been hauling around since I could remember. Expectations, guilt, loyalty, and a lifetime of being the one who never needed anything in return. That night I went home and wrote in my journal, this isn't loneliness. This is liberation. But liberation comes at a cost, especially when the people you're freeing yourself from refuse to see the chains they've placed on you. Judith escalated. She began calling friends of mine, asking if they'd spoken to me, if I was okay. She emailed my office asking if I'd changed my number. She even showed up at my apartment building once, claiming she was just in the neighborhood. I didn't let her in. I watched from the peephole as she stood outside, holding a Tupperware container of lemon bars like it was an olive branch. But I knew better. Gifts in our family were just quieter forms of manipulation. Cassie, meanwhile, took to subtler tactics. I began receiving vague, cryptic messages on social media. Some people only care when they're needed. It's funny how boundaries always show up after the money stops. She didn't tag me, but she didn't have to. Everyone knew who those posts were about, and that's when I realized they weren't trying to fix anything. They were trying to punish me for stepping out of line. That week, I started waking up without the heavy dread that had shadowed me for so many years. I wasn't waiting for an apology or confrontation. I wasn't even waiting for acknowledgement. I had stopped waiting, period. Instead, I poured myself into my photography. I spent hours walking around Denver, capturing soft moments of light hitting brick walls, the way old couples held hands, the stillness of empty benches. There was something healing about framing the world through a lens. It reminded me that perspective is everything. At the end of each session, I returned home to silence, and it no longer scared me. It comforted me. I stopped checking my phone obsessively. I started cooking again. I reorganized my apartment, rearranged my bookshelves, signed up for a free online course in editing. I did small things that added up to something big. I was living for myself. One evening, just as I was preparing to leave for my photography workshop, a final message came from Cassie. You used to be kind. Now you're just cold. Don't be surprised when Mom and Dad don't forgive you. I read it once, then again, and then I sat down. typed a response, and deleted it. Not because I didn't have something to say, but because I didn't owe her an explanation. There's a kind of strength in silence that no one ever teaches you. When you stop justifying your choices, when you let people misunderstand you because their version of you is no longer your responsibility to uphold. I walked out into the evening air, the sky fading into a shade of blue that reminded me of old denim. For the first time in years, I didn't feel cold. I felt calm. Because when you stop being who they expect, they'll call you selfish, cold, dramatic. But when you survive that storm, when you choose peace over performance, you begin to understand what real freedom feels like, and you never look back. There is a silence that feels like punishment, and then there is the kind that feels like freedom. The difference is in who initiates it. Weeks had passed since I stopped answering. At first, I expected the guilt to crawl back in. I thought I would lie awake wondering if I had gone too far. But the quiet became a companion, not an adversary. I wasn't avoiding. I was healing. I removed myself from the remaining threads that had once tied me to my parents' household. The autopay accounts were closed. My name was off the mortgage. The old spreadsheets where I tracked bills and insurance payments sat untouched in a long-forgotten folder on my laptop. I didn't even glance at them. I didn't need to. Every time a new message came in, I felt less and less obligated to respond. At first, I saved them. Judith's texts asking about the health insurance, Raymond's question about how to submit a tax claim, Cassie's occasional cryptic messages asking, "Why are you acting like we don't exist?" I read them without feeling the old urge to fix, to soften, to rescue. It was the first time in my adult life that I was living without apology. I spent more time in nature. Mornings became sacred. I'd wake up before the sun and drive to the edge of the Flatirons, camera slung over my shoulder, thermos of black coffee in hand. The air smelled like pine and fresh dirt. I started to breathe again, not just physically, but emotionally, the way a person exhales when they no longer have to keep everyone else afloat. I also joined a photography workshop on Tuesdays, the kind of commitment I'd always talked myself out of because someone might need me. But no one needed me now. And for the first time, that truth didn't break me. It liberated me. My classmates were from all walks of life. A recently divorced woman who took up photography to reclaim her sense of identity, a high school teacher exploring art for the first time, a shy college student trying to document the world around her without speaking. We met in a downtown studio that smelled faintly of wood polish and ink. We laughed about lighting and exposure, studied how shadows told stories, and shared our work without fear of judgment. In that room, I wasn't anyone's fixer or daughter. I was simply Elena. Then came the call from Cheryl, our elderly neighbor in Boulder. "Elena," she said gently, "I don't mean to intrude, but your folks' house. It's not looking good. The grass is almost knee-high. There's paint peeling from the window frames. I think Cassie might have moved back in. I see her come and go. I thought you should know." I closed my eyes. The image she painted wasn't new. I had seen it in my mind before many times, how that house would begin to crumble without someone holding it together. But instead of dread, I felt a strange stillness, like watching a building collapse from far away. You can't hear it. You can't feel the dust. You just know it was inevitable. 2 days later, Cassie showed up at my door. I recognized the knock instantly, tentative, unsteady. It reminded me of childhood nights when she'd come to my room after a nightmare. But this wasn't a dream, and I wasn't that version of myself anymore. When I opened the door, she looked hollow. Her skin was pale, her hair tangled into a messy bun. She wore a faded hoodie and clutched a folder of papers like it was a life preserver. "I just need 5 minutes," she said. I stepped into the hallway, arms folded. "What's going on?" She inhaled sharply. "I need help talking to the bank. I don't understand the paperwork. It's all legal language. I don't know what any of it means." I nodded toward the folder. "You got all this when you accepted the house, didn't you?" She nodded. "And you didn't think to ask what you were inheriting? You just signed?" "I thought Mom and Dad had it figured out," she said. They said everything was in place. Of course they did, I replied, because they always figured I'd be the backup plan, that I'd step in if anything went wrong, just like always. Her eyes flickered. That's not fair. No, I said calmly. What's not fair is being written out of everything after spending over a decade fixing your messes and theirs. What's not fair is being told I'm strong as an excuse to be left behind. I didn't know it would spiral like this, she whispered. I didn't think. Exactly, I said. You didn't think. That's been the theme your whole life. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. I stepped back, positioning myself in front of the closed door. This is your lesson now, Cassie. Everyone stumbles, but no one grows if someone's always there to catch them. Her expression twisted. So you're just going to let them lose everything? I'm not letting anything happen, I said. They made choices. Now they live with them. I left her standing in the hallway, walked back into my apartment, and closed the door behind me. There were no tears, no second guessing, just a soft, undeniable knowing. I was no longer their lifeline. 3 days later, I ran into Marcus, a real estate agent I'd once gone to school with, at a small gallery event. He recognized me instantly, offering a warm smile as we chatted about my photography class and the exhibit I was preparing. Then he paused. Hey, your parents' place, is that on Cedar Street? I nodded. Yeah, someone in my office mentioned it's up for sale. High foreclosure risk, roof damage, plumbing issues. It's listed, but no bites. Sounds like it needs a lot of work. I didn't flinch. I'm fine, I said. I guess they're not. Marcus nodded, clearly sensing more beneath the surface, but he didn't press, and I appreciated that more than he knew. That night, I returned home and opened a letter I'd received earlier in the week. It was from a legal aid center I'd volunteered with during college. They were launching a mentorship program for seniors struggling with housing insecurity. They asked if I'd consider returning to help train new volunteers. I stared at the paper for a long time, not because I was conflicted, but because it felt like something full circle. I wasn't going back to fix the past. I was moving forward, using what I survived to help others navigate their own storms. I sat down and filled out the application. Not for Judith, not for Raymond, not even for Cassie. For me. Because healing doesn't mean you forget. It means you choose what you do with the pain. And I was done holding it all in. Truth has a strange way of finding its way to the surface. You can bury it under politeness, hide it behind family dinners, mute it with obligations and guilt, but eventually it rises. Not because it wants revenge, but because it wants peace. I had been silent for weeks. Not because I lacked the words, but because I finally understood that not every storm is mine to calm. I didn't need to defend myself anymore. I didn't owe explanations to people who saw my boundaries as betrayal. And yet, when Olivia pulled me aside one afternoon at the art center, her expression tense, I knew something had shifted. Elena, she said, holding her phone tightly, I think you should see this. On the screen was a Facebook post, a photo of the house in Boulder. The caption underneath it stopped my breath. It's heartbreaking when your own daughter turns her back on you. We sacrifice so much for her, and now when we need her most, she refuses to even speak to us. The post was from Judith, my mother. There was no mention of the will, no mention of the years I'd kept the house from foreclosure, no mention of the tens of thousands of dollars I had funneled into their stability. Just a carefully curated story of abandonment. Her pain wrapped in soft colors, designed to gather sympathy, to invite pity. It had over 100 shares. The comments were worse. Some kids are so ungrateful these days. She must have been brainwashed by some therapist. This generation doesn't understand family values. I scrolled through them, numb at first, and then something deeper began to build. Not anger, but the unmistakable ache of being misunderstood so profoundly that your silence becomes a weapon used against you. Raymond posted next, a simple message, but one sharpened by omission. We thought our daughter loved us. We were wrong. Then came Cassie. Her words cut in a different way. Some people only act kind when they're in control, but when they're asked to show up, they choose silence. That's today's definition of strong. I closed my laptop and stared at the ceiling of my apartment. This wasn't grief anymore. This was war. Not the screaming kind, the passive-aggressive kind. The kind fought in public forums and comment sections with half-truths and strategically vague laments. They had painted a version of me that was easy to digest. A cold daughter, ungrateful, distant. And people believed them because it fit the narrative that parents can do no wrong and children owe them everything. But they had forgotten something. I wasn't afraid anymore. That night, I opened my own Facebook account. I hadn't posted in years. Most people only knew me through occasional tagged photos or old memories. But I was done hiding behind stillness. I wrote one post. No backgrounds, no dramatic fonts, just the truth. I've been quiet for a long time because I believe that family matters should be handled privately. But when silence becomes a weapon used to distort the truth, I have no choice but to speak. Here's the will, the official document that left me out of everything despite years of financial support. Here are screenshots of the mortgage payments, my name, my bank statements. Here's the last message I received from my mother, asking me to send $2,900 to save the house. I didn't walk away from my family. I walked away from being used. My silence wasn't abandonment. It was exhaustion. And now it's clarity. I attached the images, proof, receipts, evidence that what they had crafted online was a convenient fiction, and then I ended with one line. I'm not the villain in this story. I just stopped being the hero they could exploit. The post exploded. It wasn't the virality that shocked me. It was the relief. Friends I hadn't spoken to in years reached out. Former coworkers messaged me to say they had always suspected I was caring too much. Even people from the old neighborhood chimed in. I remember how often you came by to help them. I never saw Cassie once. One woman wrote, "This took courage. Thank you for reminding the rest of us that we're allowed to speak." The comments under Judith's post shifted tone. Slowly at first, then rapidly. Some people unfriended her. Others began asking questions. And within 48 hours, her post disappeared. Raymond's went down too. Cassie changed her profile picture to a grayscale flower. Her signature move when things were spiraling. I didn't gloat. I didn't post again. I didn't need to, because I hadn't shared my side to win. I shared it to reclaim myself. It was the first time in my life I had stood in the open, exposed and unashamed, and said, "This is what really happened." And people listened. But more importantly, I listened to myself. That weekend, I went on a photography walk through the city. I captured rusted bike racks, chalk drawings on sidewalks, the worn smile of a street performer juggling with one hand. I stopped by my favorite bookstore, bought a secondhand copy of a poetry collection, and sat under a sycamore tree to read. Every action felt like a declaration. I am no longer living in reaction to their story. The following Monday, I launched a blog, Unburdened Daughters. It was just a name at first, a placeholder. But the more I wrote, the more I realized how many people were carrying the same weight. The daughters who had been cast as villains because they finally said no. The sons who had been cut off for refusing to pay one more bill. The siblings who were scapegoated while others were coddled. Messages flooded in, some short, some paragraphs long. One woman wrote, "Reading your story gave me permission to walk away from a family that only loved me when I was useful." That night, I sat in my apartment with a mug of chamomile tea and let the silence wrap around me. Not the cold kind, but the kind that feels like a weighted blanket. It was the silence of truth having finally been spoken. I didn't expect Judith, Raymond, or Cassie to change. I didn't need an apology anymore, because apologies mean little when you know someone would repeat their behavior the moment you let your guard down. What I had now was far more valuable. I had my voice back, and I wasn't giving it up again. It's strange. The first morning you wake up and realize you're not bracing for something. No guilt to navigate, no message to decipher, no looming financial obligation that belongs to someone else but somehow became yours. just quiet, stillness, and an unexpected kind of lightness. That's what my life slowly became after I spoke my truth. Days stretched into weeks, and not a single message came from Judith, Raymond, or Cassie. No apologies, no backpedaling. Just a long, echoing silence that once would have crushed me, but now felt like space to breathe. And in that space, I lived. Monday mornings found me at the Boulder Arts Center, greeting bright-eyed students holding their cameras like they were fragile pieces of magic. Teaching teenagers how to see beauty through a lens felt almost poetic, considering how much of my life I had spent trying to capture something that couldn't be framed. Belonging. Their questions reminded me of my own early wonder. Why does the shadow look so soft? How do you make something feel like a memory? I would smile, showing them how contrast works, how light writes stories across surfaces. They were learning photography. I was relearning joy. In the evenings, I took an online course in video editing, the kind of thing I used to consider a luxury. I invested in a used but powerful editing laptop, rearranged a small corner of my apartment into a creative nook, and began stitching together stories out of footage and stillness. It didn't matter whether I was any good. What mattered was that it was mine. My weekends were full of slow mornings, French press coffee, music echoing from the kitchen, walks by Boulder Creek. I started baking again, trying recipes I never gave myself time to learn. I even posted a few creations online, just for fun. No expectations, just flour, sugar, and curiosity. I built a small but vibrant circle of friends through the workshop and the blog. Women who had also chosen to reclaim themselves. We met for dinner at a plant-filled cafe downtown or picnicked on the grass at Chautauqua Park. We talked about boundaries, books, our parents, and sometimes we just sat in silence together. Healing didn't need to be loud. It just needed to be shared. Every so often, someone would send me an update about the house in Boulder. It had been listed for sale for months. The price had dropped repeatedly. Photos online showed a sagging roofline, discolored siding, and overgrown grass curling along the driveway. There were no offers. It looked exactly the way it felt to live in it, worn, unacknowledged, and held together by invisible effort. Effort that was no longer mine. Then one day, Cheryl called. "I saw Cassie at the grocery store," she said. "She's moved back in. Looks like she's handling the errands now. But she didn't look, well, just thought you should know." I thanked her. Then I went back to editing a short video of mountain fog drifting between trees. My chest didn't clench, my throat didn't close. I didn't feel smug, I just felt done. Because that was the thing no one ever told me about walking away. It doesn't always come with fireworks or dramatic closure. Sometimes it just feels like setting down a heavy bag you didn't realize you'd been carrying for years. My savings account had finally stopped shrinking. I was able to set aside money for a trip to Seattle in the fall, something I dreamt of since college. A place I wanted to visit not for any practical reason, but simply because I wanted to see the leaves change near the water. I put a deposit down on a semi-professional camera I had once deemed unnecessary. I realized how often I had denied myself joy in favor of duty. And now I was learning to care for myself the way I had once cared for everyone else. The blog continued to grow. Unburdened Daughters had become a quiet community. I didn't monetize it. I didn't seek followers. But the messages kept coming. One woman shared how she finally told her mother she couldn't attend every family gathering without being emotionally manipulated. Another wrote, "Your story helped me say no for the first time in my life, and I didn't explain why." Their words made me cry sometimes, not because they were sad, but because they were brave. And then, one rainy afternoon in late October, I received a letter in the mail. The envelope was blue, Judith's favorite color. I recognized the handwriting instantly. Neat, loopy, careful. I didn't open it right away. I made tea first. Sat by the window, watched the rain trace the glass. When I finally unfolded the letter, the words were shaky but familiar. "Elena, I don't know where to begin. I don't know how to fix what's happened or if it can be fixed at all. Your father isn't as strong as he used to be. Cassie's trying, but she's overwhelmed. I know I made mistakes. I thought I was protecting the one who needed the most help. I didn't see how much I was asking of the one who never asked for anything. I don't know how much time we have left to make things right, but if you're willing, I'm still here." I read it twice, then a third time, and I didn't tear it. I didn't respond either. I folded it carefully and placed it in the drawer next to my desk, where I kept old photo negatives, handwritten notes from friends, and things that needed time to be understood. I didn't hate her. I wasn't angry. I just didn't have it in me anymore to keep sacrificing without being seen. I continued teaching. I continued writing. I held a small exhibit at a friend's cafe showcasing a series called Soft Strength. It was a collection of quiet moments, an elderly woman's hands around a warm mug, a dog sleeping under a park bench, a single flower blooming through cracked concrete. At the end of the evening, a middle-aged woman walked up to me and said, "I don't know why, but every photo of yours feels like it's speaking for someone who's been quiet for a long time." I smiled, said nothing, because she was right. I had spent years staying quiet for peace, for the role, for the hope that if I gave enough, I'd finally be chosen. But now I had chosen myself. I learned to say no without guilt. I learned to let people face their own consequences. I learned to live without constantly checking my phone for emergencies that weren't mine to handle. The house in Boulder was still listed. Last I heard, it had been reduced again. And whenever someone came to view it, Cassie would try to act like the responsible homeowner. But when asked about maintenance records, she had nothing to show. Because all those years, no one had taught her what to do. And I wasn't going back to fill in those blanks. They still lived there. Judith, Raymond, Cassie. On paper, we were a family. But they were no longer at the center of my life. Not the way they once were. My life was no longer about rescue. It was about rhythm. Gentle, steady, mine. And one afternoon, as I stood at the edge of Liberty Lake with my new camera in hand, I caught the perfect frame. A little boy ran across the path, his mother chasing after him, laughing. I clicked. The light hit just right. The wind stirred the trees. In that moment, I understood something I had only begun to grasp before. Family isn't who shares your last name. It's who values your presence, who treats your love like a gift, not a transaction. It's the people who choose you, not out of obligation, but out of recognition. And if you've never had that, you can still choose it for yourself. That's what I did. I didn't look back. And for the first time in my life, I didn't need to. Elena's story began with an assumption most of us carry quietly in our bones, that love, when given enough, will always be reciprocated. That loyalty, when proven time and time again, will eventually be honored. And that family, no matter how complicated, will at the very least recognize your worth. But what she discovered, first in a quiet living room in Boulder, then through a rising storm of silence, resentment, and public shaming, is that none of these things are guaranteed. Sometimes the people you give the most to are the first to forget what you've sacrificed. Sometimes the love you pour endlessly into others becomes invisible, expected, or even resented. Through the quiet pages of her life, Elena was the one who stayed up late reconciling budgets that weren't hers, fixing broken pipes, making impossible financial decisions so that the home she didn't live in could stay intact. She was the one who made herself small so others could breathe more freely. But the moment she found the will, the one that named only her sister Cassie as heir to everything she'd helped preserve, something in her broke. Or rather, something inside her woke up. Because that kind of betrayal doesn't shout, it clarifies. In the days and weeks that followed, Elena did what so many find terrifying. She said no. Not with a scream, not with a dramatic departure, but with measured, steady boundaries. She removed herself from financial entanglements, refused to fix problems she hadn't caused, and began the quiet, arduous work of choosing herself. And for that, she was called cold, selfish, ungrateful. The same hands she once held up were now pointed at her in judgment. Her family's reaction was not remorse or reflection, but retaliation. Online posts, public narratives crafted to present themselves as victims of her silence. Yet Elena didn't remain quiet. She spoke her truth, not to be cruel, but to reclaim her story. She laid out the facts, not to shame, but to be heard. And in doing so, she discovered something rare, a wave of others who recognized her journey because they, too, had been used in the name of love. As the house in Boulder crumbled from neglect, Elena's life began to bloom. She didn't return to rescue the past. She planted something new through photography, teaching, writing, and rediscovering the joys she once denied herself. She redefined what home meant. Not a place, not people, but a relationship with herself that no longer relied on being needed to feel valued. The lesson we take from Elena's story is not one of bitterness, but one of boundary. It is not about walking away in anger. It's about walking toward peace. In a world that often equates worth with utility, especially in family roles where caretaking becomes identity, Elena shows us that we are allowed to stop. We are allowed to protect our energy, even from those who raised us. We are allowed to demand respect, not because we're perfect, but because we're human. Applying this to our lives today means asking harder questions. Are you saying yes out of love or out of fear of rejection? Are you giving because you want to, or because you've been conditioned to believe you must? Have you ever mistaken being needed for being loved? If the answer to any of those is yes, it doesn't mean you're broken. It means you're ready to learn the same lesson Elena did, that real love honors your boundaries, not just your generosity. Now let's take a moment to reflect. If you were in Elena's position after years of sacrifice and you found yourself written out of everything, how would you respond? Would you A, try to explain yourself and work to rebuild the relationship, hoping for change? B, choose silence and distance, focusing on healing yourself and letting them face the consequences? Comment your answer below with either A or B. We'd love to know how you view this kind of crossroads. Your perspective could help someone else facing a similar situation feel a little less alone. And while you're at it, let us know in the comments. What part of Elena's story resonated most with you? Have you ever had to walk away from someone you still cared about just to preserve your peace? Your experiences matter here, and your voice might be the one someone else needs to hear today. If you found this story powerful, if it made you pause and think or feel seen in ways you didn't expect, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us create more honest, healing, and meaningful content. Stories like this aren't just entertainment, they're a mirror. And sometimes all we need is to see ourselves a little more clearly.